for attending this panel, Run Like a Lawyer. My name is Alicia Plurhopoulos, and I am a professor at Georgetown Law. And the other moderator here with me is Heidi Lee Feldman, and she is also, we both teach at Georgetown Law. She's also a professor of law there. So I'm really excited. We're really both very excited to see this very, crowded room today. By show of hands, would you raise your hand if you are planning to run for office? Or thinking about running. I mean, right? So that is one of the first steps, right? Admitting it and raising your hand saying, I'm going to be running for office. And that's really exciting. In this time, at this time, it's more important than ever that progressive lawyers run and hold office, elected office. So we've got a really wonderful panel for you today, a group of folks who are currently in office. And I'll introduce them briefly. Their bios are in your conference materials, but I'll introduce them. We have Kathleen Clyde with us. She is currently a state representative in the Ohio House of Representatives, and she is running for Ohio Secretary of State currently. We also have Rosanna Fernandez. She is a circuit judge with the Circuit Court of Cook County in Illinois. With us, we also have Carl Racine. He is here in D.C. as the first Attorney General of the District of Columbia. We also have Lee Harris. He is a minority leader and state senator in the Tennessee Senate. So I'll also add that Lee Harris is also a professor of law at the University of Memphis School of Law, and we were in law school together, actually. Oh, wow. So. And then we also have with us Amanda Littman. She is the co-founder and executive director of Run for Something. I'm sure most of you have probably heard of Run for Something. So Amanda Littman. And last but not least, we have Jessica Jackson Sloan. She is currently the mayor of Mill Valley, California, and she's also national director and co-founder of Cut 50. So the panel is going to take the form of really us moderating some questions with our speakers and guests, and then we will have time for audience questions, and finally we'll have an activity for you all to start, setting your sights on your path to office. So first question, this question is for Carl and Kathleen. And so the question is, at what point in your career, in your legal career, did you decide to run for office? What were the steps that you took towards this goal, and what steps do you think you should have taken but maybe didn't?
Thank you very much. So for me, it was really a matter of fortuity, timing, and opportunity all hitting at the same time. The District of Columbia has always had an appointed Attorney General, appointed by the mayor, and the office itself was really subordinate to the mayor. The residents of the District of Columbia tired of that approach because over a period of years, it just seemed as though the Attorney General was really acting as the mayor's personal lawyer. And so through a grassroots effort, 83% of the residents of the District of Columbia voted in favor of going with an elected Attorney General. Very interesting, the elected people already, the mayor and the council, they didn't really welcome the idea of having a new elected official for a new office that would be, frankly, quite powerful. And so they tried to delay the election. The referendum that the people adopted required an election to occur in 2014. The council and the mayor at the time supported law to change that to have the election occur in 2018. The people got fed up, and at the end of the day, a D.C. court in June of 2014 ruled that the election shall occur in November 2014. And so right at that point on that day, I decided to take a hard look at that race. I had been on the sidelines working in the private sector as well as the public sector, and frankly, perhaps like many of you, I felt as though we didn't have our best and brightest and candidly most ethical people running our government. And so I looked at that opportunity at the AG's office, and I just determined to get off the sidelines and stop, excuse my language, bitching about things from, the stands, but instead get in the game and try as best I could to win and then be effective in office. In terms of your last question, what would I have done differently? I think that after 2.5 almost years of service, I wish I had been in a chair like you're sitting in right now sooner and gotten in the game earlier to have an impact on people's lives, because as I'm sure my colleagues will tell in their own way, really, the government needs you. And if you come in committed with talented people and focus and stay true to your roots and act with integrity, you can actually have a profound positive impact on people's lives.
Nice. Thank you to everyone for coming this morning, and also to ACS for always being so good and having great discussions like this and inviting me to participate in them sometimes. I heart ACS. So at what point in my legal career did I decide to run for office? I often tell the story of the seed was planted in law school when I was a law student at Ohio State. I was in a class, it was kind of a blip that year, but we had a heavily male-dominated class. It was close to 70-30. It's not usually that way. It just, I'm sure the way the admissions went that year just happened to be that way. And so there was that environment I was in, plus I noticed that there just were a lot of men in my law school class talking about politics and talking about running for office, and when I'm in Congress or when I'm governor or when I'm a legislator, I'm going to do this. And none of the women were saying those things, and none of the women were in that conversation. And I was really frustrated by that. I didn't know if I actually wanted to run for office myself. That sounded pretty scary. But I wanted women to be saying those things too. So I just started saying them and talking about running for office myself, even though I wasn't really sure I was going to do that. I thought women needed to be in that space and in that conversation. So that's somewhat when I decided to run for office. And then I would say I ran about 1.5 years after I graduated from law school. And my job I had a couple jobs in between that time, but I worked for the Speaker of the Ohio House, and that is when I really decided I wanted to run, because I was right in the State House, seeing what it took to be an elected state representative in the Ohio House. I saw what the campaigns were like. I saw what being in the office was like, and that was when I really thought, okay, I think I can do this. And I had a grasp of what it would take. So there were also a lot of young people in office, not young women, but a lot of young men in their 20s and early 30s. So that kind of motivated me too, of, okay, young people are doing this, so I think I can do this too. And when I was elected, I was the youngest elected woman in the entire State House. Which I now have changed. There are now young women have come more aggressively and been running, which is amazing. So I'm really glad to see that. What were the first steps that I took towards running for office? I would say I didn't know it at the time, but I did a lot of work in state government when I was a law student, because Ohio State is in the capital city, which was very handy. So I clerked in the State House. I clerked for the Ohio Secretary of State, got a lot of exposure to state government. I wrote down 3 things too. I met with mentors of mine to get advice for what steps I needed to take to run. I met with the current office holder who was term limited and whose seat I was seeking very early on. and I'm a Democrat, and I met with Democratic Party officials. Those were some very early steps I took. Some steps I should have taken but didn't. I would say I wish I had been more involved in the party. I think being involved in your party organization is helpful and not something a lot of young people necessarily know how to open those doors and run for precinct committee person or however your state or locale is organized. There were people in law school who were already doing that. They were already on those committees that I didn't even really know about. So look into your party structure, and that's a good way to get backing early. And I also wish I had done more one-on-one meetings when I first ran and just like listed a lot of the important people that have a stake in the office that I was running for, and just kind of work diligently through that list. I think that would have helped me build support kind of in an easier way early on, because I often felt like after I got elected, I was kind of making up ground, trying to introduce myself to people, and I should have come to them earlier. So, yeah, I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. So this question is for Amanda. Just would you like to add your perspective from being the executive director, run for something, on what initial steps folks should take to run for office if they're thinking?
Totally. So first, a quick 30-second overview on what Run for Something is. Run for Something is a brand new PAC that recruits and supports young progressives running for local office for the first time. So if you are under 35-ish, if you're thinking about running for something like school board, city council, state legislature, I don't care about Congress, I don't care about governor, you people you'll be fine. If you're thinking about running for something local for the first or second time, we are here to help you. We launched on Inauguration Day and have recruited more than 10,000 people who signed up to say they want to run for office. We have hundreds of people already on the ballot. We're only 4 months old, and already this organization has exploded. I'm a campaign hack. I am aggressively not a lawyer, not an elected official. My lawyers don't like me very often. So my experience comes from the campaign mechanics side of things. So there's a couple of things that folks didn't mention that I want to bring up. The first is when you're deciding what office to run for, people tend to think, oh, what can I win? What's the most strategic? Flip it. What's the problem you want to solve, and what's the office that lets you solve it? That makes every part of your campaign easier if you can clearly answer that question. Your message is easier. Your drive is easier. Actually running for office is pretty tiring, and if you have an internal motivation of a problem that you care about solving, the rest of it is much simpler and more straightforward. For example, if you care about zoning laws, all the more power to you, city council. If you care about education, school board. If you want something a little bit broader but really impactful on day-to-day life, state legislature. I'm sure Lee can talk about this, how state legislatures do incredibly meaningful work that nobody pays attention to, and it matters. The second thing I would say, to Kathleen's point, is get involved with the party. Your greatest currency when you run for office are your relationships with others. Knowing people who will help you when you decide to run will matter. So get to know people who are already inclined to be politically engaged, whether that means through the party, other campaigns, volunteer. Go to party committee meetings. They're going to be really boring. You're going to be annoyed because nothing's going to get done. Show up anyway and keep showing up. It matters that you're there and your energy is there. More importantly, it matters who you meet and that you're meeting people who, when you decide to step up, will be like, oh, I know that person, they've shown up, they're a reliable steward of our values, I can work with them. The third thing I would say is get online, be a presence on social media, be a presence on the internet. It is 2017, that matters. You need to tweet. I hate saying that. I'm a digital professional. I hate saying that you need to tweet anyway. It feels ridiculous. You need to do it. Be on Facebook. Build up an audience over time so that when you decide to run, those people are there for you. The fourth thing I would say is particularly for all of the men in this room, because there's a lot of you, and to my chagrin, not enough women, ask other people to run too. Particularly men, find a woman in your life and say, hey, I think you should run for office. I admit usually my spiel is we don't need more lawyers in office, we need more teachers and nurses, but we need more good lawyers in office. So I have to edit in my head. We do need more good people in office, and we need more good women and more good people of color in office. So if you know someone who isn't likely to run unless they're asked, which means not a white dude, ask them. It is your responsibility to make sure that if you decide not to run, to find someone who will. And if you are a white dude who decides to run, make sure that you're representing those values and fighting for the people who might not have a voice, because that's really, really important. The final thing I will say is be ready to work hard. There is no app that will do this for you. There's no shortcut. You as a candidate, especially for something local, need to be ready to knock doors. You need to be ready to make calls. You need to be ready to do it yourself. You can't outsource it. You can't get technology to cover it for you. Fundraising is best done by you, and canvassing is best done by you. It is hard. It is tiring. But again, if you are driven by that problem you want to solve, at least you know you're doing it for the right reasons.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so this question is for Lee, Rosanna, and Jessica. So how did you juggle your job and running for office? Did you work through your candidacy or take a leave of absence? And was your employer supportive? So we'll start with Lee.
Thanks a lot. I'm pleased and honored to be here. So I've run for quite a few offices now, 39, but I've run for Congress right out of law school, which was a horrible decision. And of course, I lost that race. 5 years later, I ran for Memphis City Council. I won that race, runoff general election. And then I ran for state senate 3 years after that and won that race, and I ran against an incumbent. And I have been in the practice of law for a couple of years out of law school, and after that I have been teaching at the University of Memphis Law School. So I've been teaching at the University of Memphis for 10 years, and that's or more than 10 years now by way of background. And I am now part-time. Although I have tenure at the University of Memphis, I'm more or less part-time because I'm spend so much time in politics and government at this point. So what I will say is that most of the employers for you, I would imagine, are going to be willing to work with you if you decide you want to run for office. I think there are some positive benefits for them to have someone in these positions, particularly someone that builds the reputation of the firms that you may work for, or if you're in private practice. So I don't think, first let me start here. I think the first 2 years out of law school is not that big of a deal. You can do anything you want to do. But after that, you got to kind of think strategically about where you want to work in, who's going to be flexible enough to give you the time to run for office if you should decide to do it. I think the vast majority of law firms, because I think there's some benefits to them reputationally, will probably allow you to do it. But you still got to think strategically about that. I always knew I wanted to run for office, right? I was in law school talking about running for office. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? You don't have to accidentally end up running for office. You can also plan ahead. And so I knew I was going to run for office, and so I knew that there were some careers out there that would give me the kind of opportunity to do what I wanted to do. One was being a law professor, right? You get tenure. What can they tell you? What can they tell you? So I became a law professor and got tenure, and and that gives me a lot of room to kind of do what I want to do and not really have a boss per se. But there are plenty of careers like that. You can, of course, put out your own shingle. You can work with your law firm managing attorney, and I suspect they will work with you. But whatever you do, if you want to run for office, the one thing that is really important to know right now, way ahead of time, is that it's going to require tremendous sacrifice. And this idea that there's somebody out there that's going to help you or give you something, or somebody should be proud and applaud because you decided to run for office, those people don't exist, right? And those people don't exist. You do it because it's the right thing, because you care about an issue or care about your community or care about making a difference in the lives of people. And you understand that that kind of value means sacrifice. So if you are at a law firm, it's going to require you to take a pay cut. And you shouldn't complain, right? Complain, oh man, I can't run for office because it'll require me to sacrifice half my salary. So what? right? You're right. I'm part-time at the University of Memphis. It's required some sacrifice to run for office, but I did it because that's where my principles lie, and I believe that it's important to be out there and to make a difference. Another thing I always hear from people, career-wise, when they think about running for office, well, I can't do it. First, they tell me about the salary thing, and politicians, people who are in elected office, they don't hear that. They don't care about that stuff. Either you want to do it or you don't, and that kind of stuff is just, that's not very persuasive. The other thing they'll say is, oh man, I can't take the time off that it's going to take to run. What? I mean, what? Right. You have a whole career and you can't take 6 weeks off to run for office and make a difference in your community, right? You really got to get serious. And when people tell me that I can't take 6 weeks off to make a difference in the lives of people that I care about or community I care about, it's frustrating. You got to take 6 weeks off. You've got to be full-time. I would say you can run for anything state or local-wise if you are committed to about 3 months. If you can do full-time, about 3 months worth of work, you can probably do anything at the state and local level, but it probably takes a minimum of a commitment of 6 weeks of kind of a full-time commitment. Don't try to do everything. Try to do the things that's most important to you. Prioritize, and if making an impact in your community is a priority, then you're going to have to do some sacrifice. You're going to take some time off. You're going to have to really commit to it. And it is worth it, because I can speak for somebody at the state and local level. You do make a difference. So I'll stop there because I don't want to go too long. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Rosanna?
All right, that's going to be tough to follow up. He did hit on a lot of things that I was going to address. When I first ran for office, I had to. I was appointed by the Illinois Supreme Court as a full circuit judge with an expiration date. So therefore, I had to run for office in order to keep my position. And if I didn't, I went back to my own law practice. So the first thing is, was my employer supportive? Well, during the hours of 8:30 and 4 o'clock, I was not able to touch anything ethically in any way, shape, or form politically related or related to any money. Ethically, as a sitting judge, I was not able to ask for any money. So in terms of being supportive in that way, absolutely not. I had to wait. I had to wait until after work hours. Otherwise, I would be plastered on the newspaper, and I don't think that I would have been able to succeed and win my election. So after working the regular position, sitting, judging, listening to trials all day long, then after work, as he just indicated and many of the panelists indicated, running for office is tough. You have to apply yourself 1,000%. You can't do things halfway. Every single night after work, there were different campaigning events that I had to attend to. At the time, I had a 3-year-old, so I had full-time grandma who was able to take care of my son during the time. I'm just starting to get to know him again now because I really did not see him. I got home after he went to bed, but it was something that was necessary. The motivating factor for me was, one, this is something that I always wanted to do. I always thought that my ethics, my hard work, and my ability to be fair, and the fact that everybody deserves fair judgment of their cases, not of their person, was important to me. Likewise, the other motivating factor is, if I don't work hard, I'm out. So let's work harder. I worked for a couple of decades to get to that position. With regards to that, there are, and you have to think of this, every single night there are different events that you have to go to. You have to get out there. You have to shake people's hands. Some people are social, some people are not. I was fortunate enough that I actually like to meet different people. You have to get out there and say, this is who I am, this is what I stand for. And I was out there every single night, sometimes until 11 o'clock at night, and then the next morning would start again until 6 in the morning. Sometimes you have to attend 4 to 5 different events per night, and you have to get your campaign materials together, and you have to use a lot of volunteers. Not the most incredibly wealthy person, and I certainly wasn't before I was appointed judge either. So that's one of the focus. I do want to touch on, before I was appointed, I did run not for a full-blown election, but as an associate judge, where the sitting circuit judges vote for you. During that time period, I was a partner at a law firm, and my law firm, fortunately for me, was very supportive up to a point. So same thing, I was able to take some time off so that I can attend to what I needed to, meeting all of the circuit judges, trying to campaign and get their vote. But thereafter, I was certainly in the office billing those hours because I still had those billing requirements. So if I had to sit there on a Saturday between 6 and noon to get some extra hours in and then come back at midnight until 3 o'clock in the morning, I was there, and my hours can prove it because they're still in the firm. But that's the important thing. You really have to want to run for office. You cannot do it halfway, and you do need all the support that you can get, whether you're friends, your family, or otherwise.
Wonderful. Jessica?
Well, first of all, thank you, ACS, for having me. I never thought I would be up here on this topic. So I think I'm probably the only one, it sounds like, who was sort of an accidental running for office. I actually remember sitting, and I've been involved with ACS for 10 years now. So I remember sitting in a panel that we were required to go to as a student chapter leader to come here and get the scholarship and everything. And I remember it was on, are you going to run for office, or pathways to office? And they asked the question, are you ever going to run for office? And sort of sleepy, I just kind of sat there and was like, no, there's no way I'll ever run for office. But I was wrong, and I'm glad I was wrong. So at the time that I decided to run for office, I am one of those folks who found an issue I really cared about. I had moved away from the community I grew up in, Mill Valley, California, and come back as a single mom in law school to realize I couldn't afford to live in the community I grew up in. This was sort of a big deal because my mom still lived there and I needed childcare. So I ended up getting a very small apartment, but not being very happy about living in 600 square feet with my daughter, and started really poking around and trying to see what had been done on affordable housing in my community, and realized not very much. So I decided to run for office. There was the city council seat coming up. I was sort of recruited by a former mayor who I was complaining to, who said, you know what, you should run. I was pretty nervous about it. I was running against 3 older white men. I'm still to date the youngest ever woman or anybody to run in my county and to be elected. So I was pretty nervous about putting myself out there. One thing I will say is I'm lucky I had ACS. Looking around this room, I actually see, Ann Gordon and Dan Roth, who came out and canvassed for me. I see Sandhya Kripalani, who was my campaign manager. I had a really solid network of progressive folks that I had worked with for a long time on various boards, ACS, the Democratic Party, other organizations, NLG, other organizations in my community that I knew well and had worked with and believed in me and were willing to give up, Saturdays, Sundays, come out, knock on some doors, throw fundraisers and the like. I also had a kid when I ran for office. I was a little lucky. She was older than 3. She was 7 years old, and luckily she really enjoyed me running for office. She thought it was really fun because she got to have her pictures all over the place and go knock on doors. And actually, at this point, she's 13 and probably a professional canvasser in her own right. I also had the good fortune of having worked on campaigns before. And I think if you're thinking about running for office, that would be my biggest piece of advice to you. Find somebody you believe in that's running and show up. And don't just show up and walk a couple houses, but show up regularly. See what they're going through. See the stress they're under. Understand how they're crafting their arguments, how they're preparing for debates, how they're fundraising. Nobody teaches you in law school how to ask for money, and I think we'll talk about that in a little bit, but that for me was probably the hardest piece of running for office, was finding the courage and the tenacity to get out there and really ask people to give me money so I could be in office. So I would really recommend getting out there and being involved in other campaigns. I had been involved in the death penalty campaign. I had been involved in local candidate campaigns, state legislator campaigns, and even a congressional campaign at that point. It also gave me a sense of who I should be talking to in my community to run for office, what events I should be showing up for, because it's not just your own events that you're having to come out for, it's all the events in the community that you want to show up to. So the local farmers market night, you want to come out there. Whatever events are going on at the local senior citizens home or the children's activities. You want to show up at all of those kind of events and really make sure that you're present and meeting people and networking. And in terms of employers, at the time I was actually representing death row inmates and their appeals, so not a low-stress job. I was lucky. I was between filing habeas petitions at the time, so I was able to take off the last couple weeks of my campaign. But for the most part, I was in the same boat, not being able to fundraise or campaign between the hours of 9 and 5 every single day. So it is a sacrifice. It is something that, you will stay up late at night, you will work all weekend, but I'll tell you it's worth it.
Thank you. So this question is for Carl and Kathleen, and then we'll get the other panelists' responses to their input too. So how did you find staff for your early runs, and how did you raise money? And then additionally, was there someone that was the biggest help to you along the way? So.
Great. Sure. I'll start. As far as staff goes, I had a primary when I first ran, and then I had a general election. I was in a somewhat swing area in Ohio, so sometimes when it's not a swing area, your primary is your big race. I unfortunately had both. Which a tough general and a tough primary. And my district was about 110,000 people in Northeast Ohio where I had grown up. And I would say finding people to help in a primary, that's when you really know who your friends are. That is tough times. It is tough to just operate in a primary because it's your family. It's your for me, Democratic Party, we're a family. We fight, we get mad and sometimes go rogue, but usually we come together in the end and work together. So my staff in my primary, I did not have staff, and I would say probably my biggest, I ran my own campaign, which was tough, and my dad was probably my biggest helper. I knocked on, I think, around 10,000 doors in my primary race. I knocked on, I think, 6,000 of those doors, and my dad knocked on 2,000 doors. And then I had a mix of awesome volunteers doing the rest. So I leaned heavily on a family member who parents are like, my dad I had to separate from him because he would take forever talking at the doors, like bragging about me from 100 years ago, telling my whole life story. But it worked. I feel like every door he knocked on definitely got me a vote. So he had just retired. He was a legal aid lawyer his entire career. So that was great to have. I will also say my high school government teacher and cross-country coach, who had retired, put up hundreds of yard signs for me and did a lot of organizing out in sort of the rural areas of my district. So just people you don't really expect really come out and are critical to your effort. In my general election, I hired somebody who had worked in the state house and who I had gotten to know, who I knew the ropes of campaigning. And he had also been part of a fellowship program, so there was some vetting that I knew he was really skilled staffer, and he did a great job. Moved out to, I live 2.5 hours from the capital city in Ohio, so he moved and did a great job for me. Money. This is just absolutely critical. If you are thinking about running for office and are uncomfortable with raising money, you're not thinking about the right thing. You need to get yourself to be able to ask people for money and get comfortable with it quick, or this isn't for you. And I hate to say that, but it's just absolutely critical. I'll tell one quick story. I was the PILF president in law school. So that's the student-funded fellowships. So I know most law schools have something like that. And we raised $70,000 the year that I was president. And I knew I needed to raise around $100,000 to win my state house seat. And for me, having raised $70,000 as a law student for a student organization, it kind of got me in the frame of mind, like, okay, I can do a little, if I'm doing this full time, I can do a little more than that and get where I need to be. And I used a lot of those same skills that I used as our team did during our PILF time in law school. I would say I did aggressive Rolodexing, which means going through every list, coming up with a giant list of every person you know and attaching basically a dollar amount to them, which is, kind of not the best part of this, but an important part. And also just going through your phone, every single contact, going through your Facebook friends, every single contact, just anywhere you can find names. And then I also blocked out time to call people, basically hours each week that I set aside to make sure I call people and ask them for money. I'll stop in 1 second. This is so important. And I want to say too, you're not going to be able to email people, just send a blast email and raise money, or put something on Facebook, or ask somebody to help you raise money and think they're gonna, if they're not willing to make calls. You have to call people yourself and ask them, make a case and ask them for money, and you have to spend a lot of time doing it. So I just strongly recommend you work on developing those skills if you're interested in running for office, because you're gonna need them.
Great, thank you.
I think what Kathleen said is exactly right, and there is no way to sugarcoat it, and it is, at least for me, the worst part of the job, being holed up in a room with a dutiful aide who's got a binder of names and numbers and dollar bills attached to their name for you to call time and time again and ask them to contribute. No excessive small talk, no how the kid's doing this and that, no even passes on the list because you don't particularly care for the people you're calling, right? And let me tell you something, as an accomplished procrastinator, I could come up with every reason in the book why I didn't want to call Jane Doe. Oh, her father hates me. Let's move on. No, call that person, ask, get it done. You know what is the worst thing about the fundraising game? And I'm a huge advocate of aggressive campaign finance reform, public financing of campaigns, hard and strict anti-pay-to-play provisions. We need that. The reason why we need that is because there actually is a reverse correlation between people who can easily ask people for money and poor candidates. People who win office are not competent, don't have the right level of public integrity and compassion. They have an easier time calling people and asking for money. So you've got to do it. I wanted to react mildly to something Lee said, and I think he's right, which is that generally speaking, your employers, and for me, I was the managing partner of a fairly significant law firm here in town called the Venable Law Firm. I was the managing partner there for about 6.5 years and had a history with that firm, dates back about 20 years, done some other things in my life. But your employers will be there for you, guess what? If you were a good colleague, employee, boss, etc. If you're a complete jerk, right, and you think that people who know you best are going to support you, you're wrong. I've also seen many, many lawyers in particular who want to run for office jump from firm to firm, going to firms thinking that a 6-month stint at a firm or a 12, 18-month at a firm stint is going to develop the kind of goodwill that will serve as a large fundraising base, I'm here to tell you, it won't. People, they'll sense you out in a heartbeat. He's here or she's here because they're going to eventually ask me for money, and they've not really contributed to the good of the firm. The best thing you can do if you're thinking about running in the future, and that future may be a couple of years out, is become a better colleague at work. If you're in a for-profit firm, that means when you bring a piece of business in, share that business. Give it the credit, the revenue to someone else. Those are the people that at the end of the day will fight for you because they know you're a decent person who's going to have a positive impact in life. Two other quick points. The family piece is amazing. The daughters, the sons, and the dads. My mother was extraordinary. My mother happened to work as a professor at a local university for 45 years, foreign languages, English as well. And she was the type of person who had folks in our house every single day for extra stuff, food, tutoring sessions, etc. I can't tell you how many people I would just meet and said, you know, your mom taught me how to read. When you have something like that going on, it ain't even about you. It's that the decency of your dad and all the work he did at Legal Aid spoke for you. The last thing I'd say is it's so important to speak with people like Amanda who know the game, because campaigns are weird organizations. They're like IPOs that don't go public. Organizations that are built to die and end. And there's craziness that happens in those organizations. So at the earliest time, it's incredibly important to identify a campaign manager, a campaign strategist, and a core team who are ethical, who work hard as hell, and who are smart.
Thank you. So I'll ask the rest of the panelists to contribute now and to the question of, you know, how did you find staff for your early runs, and how did you raise money, and did you have a big supporter like a dad or a mom or something like that?
Starting.
Sure, let's just go down the line then.
All right. With, well, let me see. Immediately before I got appointed, I just have to give credit to this person because I think this person really pushed me to go the direction that I wanted to, and that he knew. I volunteered pretty early on because I liked to, in terms of different campaigns, getting signatures for people to get on the ballot. Congresswoman Robin Kelly, I helped get signatures for her on her first failed attempt, and now she's a successful congressman. But it was a state senator, Senator Don Harmon over in Illinois. I did not live in his area, but I happen to have a lot of friends that I visited quite often. I said, you know what, I'll volunteer here. And as an attorney, I volunteered as a poll watcher. I helped get signatures. I helped in people's campaigns. I helped with fundraising. I attended people's fundraisers. But never with my life ever with the thought of, oh, I'm going to run in a general election. That was never in my thoughts. So looking back in terms of how do you staff when you finally do have to run, it was, for me, the friendships that I established, not just in law school, not during the 2 weeks before I decided to run, but literally the people that I grew up with that I knew when I was 8 years old in my neighborhood. Some of them who are Republican that said, don't worry, Rosanna, I am helping you. This run got signatures for me, had fundraisers for me. People in college that I was part of organizations. I'm not Asian, but I was elected as an officer for the Philippine Student Association in college. That was a huge network that really came out in force when I was running for election. My high school alumni association wrote articles about me and got the word out. It is really, truly, if you are a jerk, expect people to pay you back in kind. If you go above and beyond to help people, and it doesn't matter if you were 5 years old, 10 years old, people have memories like an elephant. they will step up and help you. I was amazed at some of the individuals that I grew up with and met along the way that volunteered for me, especially for ballot challenges, et cetera, staying up with me until 2 o'clock in the morning, running signature per signature. Go to bed, you need to get up tomorrow, let me stay up, I got it covered. All I have to do is take my son to school, or whatever they said. Those are truly those relationships. So I agree that you have to establish those very early. And if you look into all of your networks, who do you know? Who are your neighbors? Who did you go to school with? Who do you work with next door? Did you go to the bakery for the little old lady around the block whose father happens to run a law firm and has a huge network and is the president of a bar association? Those are the connections that, for example, really help me and I think are very useful. You have to put that down. Also, in terms of finance, again, when I ran as a sitting judge, it was unethical for me to ask for 1 cent. So I didn't have the dilemma where I had to. I wish I could have. I think I could have been okay with it, but I couldn't. I had my mouth zipped. And again, you had your friends who are very pushy in certain ways, helping me to that end. One piece of advice I will give you is that even if you think you are, or maybe you won't run for office, start putting those pennies away. If you ultimately do not run for office, then you can use it as a down payment for a house. But the fact of the matter is I had a nice little nest egg there so that when I had to give a good chunk of money up front, here you go. I had it ready to go in addition to fundraising. It was really helpful. So I'll let the next person.
Great, thank you.
So I guess one thing you should know about fundraising is that everybody will know where your money came from.
That's a good point.
It is public, okay? So when I ran, and most people I assume will run for a local office because there's only so many state offices, I really made a conscious decision to get local money. I obviously had a good network across the country, family in other states, friends in other areas. They gave me some money, but I put all of my efforts into local money because I wanted it to reflect the fact that I had community support. That doesn't mean I didn't use friends from other places. At the time, now I work for Van Jones. At the time, I was friends with Van Jones. We had him come into Mill Valley and do a big fundraiser for me. That was my event kickoff. I got about $10,000 just out of that one event. But that was all local money. Sure, maybe they came out to see him in part, but I got to know them too, and they wrote checks before they left. So that was really nice, and was actually something that was recommended to me by my campaign consultant. So I'll tell you a little bit about just the nitty-gritty of staff. You have paid staff, and then you have volunteer staff in most races. Some people go all volunteer. That's awesome. I did not, because I was working, feel like I had the time to really be having an all-volunteer staff. So I hired a campaign consultant. It was somebody who I knew from the Democratic Party. Again, this is where Kathleen's right, get involved in your party, get to know people. I cannot tell you on our central committee how many members of the central committee are also campaign consultants and have to leave the room whenever we do our endorsements. But there were a lot of campaign consultants, and the one I went with happened to be the chair of the Marin County Democratic Party. He'd also held a local office in a town nearby me, so he knew kind of what he was getting into. He was the one who really helped me figure out who to get endorsements from. And some of these fundraising dollars come with the endorsements, right? Like I got endorsed by the firefighters union. I got endorsed by the teachers. You'll look for sort of the bigger checks, the realtors, all of them. Again, people know where your money is coming from, so make sure that you keep that in the back of your mind. You might have somebody who's willing to write a big check, but hey, they're a developer in your town. Do you really want to take their money and have people accuse you of conflicts down the road, or have people think that you're pro, development? There's a lot of sort of decision making that goes behind that. So I had the campaign consultant to help me with endorsements. I also hired a graphic designer. I can barely turn on my computer. So the idea of me attempting to do anything on Photoshop was terrifying, or other programs that you actually use for this stuff. So she also was able to help me. I was lucky she was able to help me as well with messaging. So the things that I wanted to say, because I went to law school and they teach you how to make these like 10 paragraph arguments, did not work for campaigning. You have to be very succinct and have your pitch ready in 30 seconds and have your bullet points. So she was able to really guide me on that as well, which I found useful. I hired a treasurer. That's not something that most people necessarily do, but when I was reading through the requirements of what the treasurer accountant does, I realized that if anything goes wrong financially, they're actually legally responsible for that. And I just didn't want to put any of my friends in that position. I felt like that's a really big ask of somebody. So I hired a treasurer. There are people who will come on and just, do your accounting and do all of your reporting for the FPPC as well. Then I did have my volunteers. So my campaign manager, Sandhya, she was volunteer. She helped out in terms of coordinating other volunteers. She also served as a prep person. She also went to every single event and continues to go to every single event that I had to do in town and kind of give me feedback and make sure I didn't have snot or whatever on my clothes, because again, I had kids when I ran for office. And then I had the walkers, of course, those were volunteer. I had somebody who was organizing the fundraisers, various coffees. And they call them coffees. I will tell you, a lot of my friends who are in local office talk about this. You have coffees in your community, but they're at like 5 o'clock at night, and the coffee is like red or white. So it's not really coffees, which makes it more fun, though. So I had somebody who was coordinating, making sure I was getting out into each of the different neighborhoods in town to make sure that I was having these coffees and hitting all the different interest groups, right? Because there's a lot of people who are interested in different facets of your town. And then I had somebody who was doing my social media, not because I didn't want to and not because, I didn't want to be a part of that messaging. I did help craft a lot of it, but when you're out at so many different events, it's nice to have somebody who can remind you, like, hey, tweet something about this, or what do you want me to tweet for you, or take a picture of, and, be maintaining your website on the back end as well. So I'll stop there.
Okay, so there's a lot of things I want to say, but I'm going to try to keep it brief as possible. And so I'll just say this, that I think there are probably kind of 3 buckets of givers. There's the ideological givers, the transactional givers, and kind of the networks. If you're the people you work with at a law firm or the people who are employees of yours and so forth. Of those 3 buckets, the network givers are probably the better ones, right? Your family members, those are the ones that are a little bit more dependable, reliable, and that are going to be with you for the rest of your political career, right? You don't have to worry about what office you're running for, et cetera. These are your networks. But those are kind of the toughest ones, in my view. It's tough for me, right? I don't come from a wealthy family and I don't run a business. And so it's hard to produce those networks. So those other 2 buckets, ideological givers and the transactional givers, the easiest way to produce those is just to be an incumbent, right? To be an incumbent, to have an office of some kind, right? To be in the state house running for the state Secretary of State, to be a Memphis City Council member running for the state Senate, or to be anything on the school board, right? Because if you have any position in elected office, then you're going to be exposed to those folks that are just transactional people that just have to do business and develop a relationship with the office holder. And then the ideological givers, the people that have an issue at stake before the body. And so you're going to naturally develop a relationship with those too. So there is something to be said about incumbency. I think I benefited from that when I was on the Memphis City Council running for state Senate. I knew it costs about $100,000 to run for state Senate in Tennessee, at least 100. And I knew that I would raise $100,000 because I'm on the Memphis City Council. I mean, what's going to happen? Right? They are going to donate. The people that have business before the city council and so forth. It's just the reality, right? Let's be honest about some of that. So incumbency has some sort of power to kind of convene people and to make sure that you can create some base of support. Only thing I also say about fundraising is just kind of I would say get good at it first. I think my personal opinion is I don't think you start with a $10,000 giver, a big giver. Start small. Try to develop your message. I think there's a lot of skill in fundraising. It's about connecting with people, messaging. I mean, there's a lot of things going on, and I would try to get good at it first. Try to develop a regular schedule around it if you're going to do it. People get all wide-eyed when they face really big numbers. Don't face a big number. Think in terms of how much do I have to raise per day. Hopefully you don't get in a race that requires you to raise more than $1,000 a day. If you do, think about strategically about how many fundraisers you need to have and what you need to do to raise more than $1,000 a day. For $1,000 a day and under, think about how many hours you got to put in to do that, and how many calls you'd have to make, and how many people you'd have to close, and where. Really important thing: work with somebody that you like. Right? There's going to be a million people that have political advice for you, right? The second you start talking about it, and none of them know much about anything, right? Right? So you have got to own your campaign and kind of decide who you want to listen to. Hopefully that's one or two people, right? If you're not running for the governor or the U.S. Senate, it needs to be one or two people and not the hundreds. Everybody you know is going to have some advice for you about everything, fundraising and strategy. And you got to kind of be able to kind of put that to the side. As the staff, I believe in paid staff. So, I believe in a paid campaign manager. In the past, I've done finance and political consultants. I don't do political consultants much anymore, but I believe in finance consultants. They help you kind of organize your campaign and organize your call time. I believe in paid phone bankers, paid canvassers as well. You can do volunteers, but if you're going to run a real operation, you've got to have a base and a regular schedule. That means people that are getting paid to come in and phone bank and the canvas and so forth. I guess if I have one piece of big advice, plan ahead, plan in really gritty detail about what you're going to be doing from day to day. And that would be my big advice. Thank you.
I'm just going to take over in posing some of the questions. And the next one is for Amanda Littman. From your distinctly not a lawyer perspective, please share with us what advice you can give on staffing and managing a campaign.
Sure. So real quick, I think the overarching theme you will hear again and again is don't be an asshole. Like, be a good person, make sure people you work with like you. That makes everything else easier, both for running for office and just broadly for life. And I think you'll notice that the politicians you read headlines about aren't always good people, because good people don't make for good stories, but they do make for good public servants. So please keep that in mind. A few things on campaign mechanics and tactics. Staffing, like they said, find someone you trust, ideally not someone in your family or your romantic partner. That can really blur the lines a little bit. It often works, but it makes it a little harder when you have to make tough decisions. A little bit about what you want to do if you decide today that you want to run for local office, because we're all running for local office. First, figure out what you need to do to get on the ballot. Some places it's petition signatures, some places you pay a filing fee, some places it's nominating or caucuses or conventions of the state or local party. You can call the county or city clerk where you're running and get detailed information. There is no singular source of information on this for local office, in part because elections are administered by jurisdiction. So you're all lawyers, you'll be fine. The second thing you need to do is establish your win number. Take a look at similar races over the past 3 to 4 cycles and take a look at how many people are registered to vote in that area, and then how many people actually show up, and how many the winner gets. You need to know how many people you need to vote, assuming the electorate looks like it did in the past, in order to win. From there, you'll be able to tell how many people you need to talk to, how many voters you'll need to connect with, how many doors you'll need to knock on. The third thing you do is figure out how much this race costs. And you can use that, again, past campaign finance filing reports, previous news stories about elections. You'll also be able to use some basic algebra to figure out how much they spend per voter, which will allow you to determine how much you need to raise. Again, the joy of local elections is they are often much cheaper. $100,000 for a state Senate seat or a state House seat. 75% of school board races cost $1,000 or less. Yes, isn't that awesome? You should all run for school board. Obviously there's some variations here based on how big the jurisdiction is and how many voters you have to talk to, but in a lot of places, all you need to spend in order to run is whatever you need to file, the cost of campaign lit that you give out when you're canvassing, because you're going canvassing every day, and some small gas and other travel expenses. So don't assume that every race you need to run, you need huge sums of money. On the topic of fundraising, they are all right. Reach out to your networks. Don't be afraid to call. The skills that you need to ask for money are knowing when to stop talking. When you're on the phone with someone or when you're in person with someone, you find out what they care about, you connect over shared values, you tell your story, you make your pitch, and then you stop. You wait. you are silent. You are not asking someone to loan you money for lunch. You're not asking someone to buy you a present. You're asking them to invest in their community through you. I treat fundraising like a public service. You're asking someone to channel money and energy into something they care about in a real tangible way. That's also because I'm an online fundraiser, so of course it's a public service. I'm not spamming you with email. I'm asking you to contribute to your community. But I think that's real in that, I mean, I'm sure many people have felt this way after the election of like, what do? I donate. I throw money at the ACLU. I throw money at Planned Parenthood. I throw money at organizations like Run for Something. I do something because it feels good and it feels like it matters. When you're asking someone to give money to your campaign, you're asking them to invest. So when you ask them for money and then you stop talking, the worst thing they'll say is no, and it's not about you, because it's not personal. It's about the personal reasons why they can't give right now, or why they aren't investing in your campaign, or maybe they don't do political giving. But broadly speaking, it is not a personal rejection of you, in the same way that they're not giving money directly to you. So when going through fundraising, recap, ask them for money, stop talking, let them respond. The final thing I'll say about campaign tactics and operations is that there are a lot of resources out there to help you. There are campaign trainings and candidate trainings. Women have a chance to go through organizations like Emerge America or Emily's List. There's groups like Latino Victory Project, which helps Latinos, the Leadership Institute, which helps LGBT candidates, organizations like Wellstone and the PCCC, which stands for a bunch of things I can never remember, do broader candidate trainings. Later this month, the Collective PAC and Priorities USA are hosting a Black candidate school here in DC. You can find all these trainings. They're often very affordable. They're worth going to. You will get a broader overview of campaign mechanics. You'll get to know other people running, as well as other staff that you could possibly hire. So if you're ever thinking about running, I highly recommend one of these programs. If you're not sure which one is right for you, that's something that we can help you out with.
So just to let everyone know where we're at, we're going to have a lightning round of questions, and then we're going to give you an opportunity to ask questions. We'll be asking people to come to the mic because this is being recorded. So each panelist is being given a minute to tell us in one sentence, what do you think made the difference between you winning and your opponent losing? And just to maybe reverse the order that we've been going in, let's start with Lee Harris.
All right, so I'll try to be brief. The last campaign I was in running for state senate, I think it was really important that we didn't vote to cut the pension benefits, right? So that was an issue on the Memphis City Council about whether we'd cut the pension and retirement benefits for our city workers. And there is a lot of pressure in these offices to do a lot of things that dishonor your voters and the things you ran on when you were campaigning. And I didn't vote to cut those pension benefits, and I think that preserved viability for future office because I did not betray the voters or, you know, the kind of things I campaigned on.
I think there were two big things that made the difference. Again, I was a woman running against three men who were all at least 20 years older than me. So I knew right off the bat I had to know my stuff. I had to do my homework and know every issue inside out for those debates because otherwise nobody was going to have confidence in me. The second reason I won is because I ran for an issue I believed in and a cause I cared about. Again, I ran because I could not find a home for my family in my community. That passion came through. I wasn't just running because I wanted to be in office. I was running because I really cared about something in the community, and I think people picked up that it was a genuine reason and decided to vote for me because they felt like I was authentic.
This was a tough one. For me, I think what made me more successful than, or helped me win over my opponent were several things. One was my endurance. And two was the fact that I sent my message that my election was really a historic event in Cook County because I was the first Hispanic ever to be appointed by the Illinois Supreme Court to a countywide position where we have millions of voters, and I really wanted to spread that message and achieve that. I think the genuineness of my qualifications and my ethics really shone, and my non-stop work, which for me, I was able to obtain then very key endorsements, including from the Chicago Tribune, to reach the individuals that otherwise there's no way I would have knocked on their door.
I would say that campaigning is like studying for the bar exam. You have to work really, really, really hard in a finite amount of time. And I think law school was good training for that. And that hard work can really put you over the edge in a campaign.
Before I answer the question, I would just ask the audience right now if you could just raise your hands. After about almost an hour and a half of this panel, are you still interested in running?
No.
Yeah. Let me tell you something. We gave you a lot, and I really think the organizers have done an incredible job, and my co-panelists are awesome. And everybody has an individual story, individual challenges that they've overcome, reasons why they ran. Here's the deal. Just what you said. You can do it, okay? All of these truths that we talked about are real. They're hard, but you can absolutely do it just like you did the crappy bar exam, all those, nonsensical courses that you've taken, and the shit that you've put up with at work. You can absolutely do it. The reason why I think that I won was because at a certain point in time, my campaign strategist and I came up with 5 things that we had to accomplish and that would lead to victory. And so we were focused on those 5 goals, and we literally would tick them off. And we ticked off each of those goals, and we won. And so it was strategy, focus, implementation, period. That's it.
I just want to say I love our panelists because they were so informative and so attentive to letting each other have time to speak. So big ups. Thank
Doesn't
you.
mean we're listening to each other.
So we'll have about 20 minutes of questions, and we do have a mic. Somebody going to come around with the microphone, right? And so if you have a question, just raise your hand, and we'll come around to you.
And we just ask, we'd like to take as many as possible, so please just be as direct with your question as possible.
Just 2 quick ones. Does anybody how'd you bounce back from a devastating loss, and has anybody moved to a district to run in?
I'll say I moved. I haven't lost yet. I'm sure that will happen sometime, not Secretary of State race. But I had to move back home to where I grew up, which was rural Ohio, and not where I had been for about 8 years. And a lot of my friends were gone. So that was definitely kind of a tough thing to do, and a bit of a sacrifice, and not a great job market. But I'm so glad I did. If I wouldn't have done that, I wouldn't have been elected.
And I lost. I ran for Congress. I was wide-eyed. I thought politics was about who had the best ideas. All that, right. So it's not about any of that stuff at all. So I learned from that race. So I learned from that race. I ran later, 5 years later, I ran for city council. I guess there's a lot of different lessons, but the only lesson I would say now is one of the lessons I'd impart personally is just that you run for what's available. You can't just say, you've been some of us have been saying, I want to be city of Memphis mayor, or you want to be governor of Tennessee, not, or whatever the state may be. And that's okay, but maybe it's not open right now, right? So you kind of got to reflect on what's available and run for what's available. So that's what I learned. Honesty, too.
Okay, can I say something? I've only run for one office, and we were able to win. But I got to tell you something. On the road to your singular win, or if you're undefeated, there are losses.
Yeah.
When you go to a debate, and for whatever reason the crowd, you're just not vibing with the crowd. I remember one at the 8th Street Rock and Roll Bar. It was not going to be a good day for me, I could tell, because the crowd, I was up for getting drunk, but they were all drunk. And they were clearly, sort of hostile against me. They sort of characterized as an establishment candidate. That's you become establishment when you win, and when you're winning. And so I remember walking off of that debate, and one of my buddies literally gave me a huge hug, and I felt like that boxer who has been knocked down and the manager says, "You're okay, kid." And I wanted to quit. So you're going to lose many nights, and then you're just going to have to find that reservoir of what Jessica said, why it is you're doing this, to pick your ass up the next day with a smile.
I had a question for Representative Clyde. So I'm right here. You're kind of
Okay.
yeah. So this question,
Where is he?
yeah, I was just like a voice. But this question is really important to me because I'm a Kansan, and Secretary of State's been a controversial position in my state
no
class
kidding.
several years. So my question is, when you're running for Secretary of State and there's a gubernatorial race going on and a lot of other things that are getting attention, how do you really move the needle to get people to really care about what maybe has historically been in somewhat apolitical office, unless you're Secretary of State's Chris Kobach, but
Yeah.
just to get people really excited about that when their main focus might be on the governor's race or the state AG.
Good question. And we had Ken Blackwell before Chris Kobach. So it's, these Secretary of State races are somewhat high profile. But you're right. I somewhat will live and die by the top of the ticket in my state. Thank God I have one of the best U.S. senators in the country, Sherrod Brown, who will be on top of the ticket with me. Yeah, he's awesome. But we have a 4-way primary right now for our gubernatorial candidate, and maybe more candidates get in. So that is, I'm constantly answering questions about that and dealing with that on the trail. I would say I'll have to really focus in on, one or two issues on the campaign trail to try to cut through. I'll have to use my money very strategically. I'll have to work with the ticket to kind of make sure we're, operating in unison and covering a big state. And then I would also say, you try to find the niche of your race. With the Secretary of State, it's the chief elections official in, I would say, the most important battleground state in the country. So goes Ohio, unfortunately, in this last election. So goes the country. So, you gotta just, fight hard to cut through and talk about why your office is so important. Thanks for the question.
Hi, everybody. First of all, Buckeye shout out. Go Buckeyes, Ohio State. Anyway, I actually had a question about dealing with the either financial or party pressure as you're campaigning to adopt a certain position, maybe that you don't 100% agree with, or to go a certain direction within your campaign that maybe you're not fully on board with.
I'll say really quickly, there's a lot more pressure when you're in office, and that's when you need a lot more courage, the courage to stand alone, because there'll be pressure to do things that defy how you think about issues right now. Pressure to do things like, cut pensions, I've talked about that before, or to build stadiums for billionaires, or to cut libraries. And everybody around you will be telling you, we have to do this, right? Well, we have to do this, right? That there's no other choice. And that's when you really have to have the courage to stand alone and kind of really decide what your values dictate.
Yeah, I'll tell you that I actually made those conscious decisions, right? Like I knew there were certain development projects going on in our town that are still going on to this day. And those developers did come to me and offer money, but right off the top I said, I'm not taking any development money. I'm not taking money from developers, which has helped me be able to stand up at those meetings and say, sorry, I'm not going to approve that luxury townhome project or whatever it might be. Same thing with the realtors. We had a sewer lateral ordinance. See, it's really sexy stuff to be in local government. We had a sewer lateral ordinance coming up that was going to have a trigger point that really affected sales of houses, and I knew that was going to be something we were going to have to face because we had 30 million gallons of sewage pouring into our streets every time we had our floods, or rainy seasons. So. I knew I didn't want to take their money. And it just was sort of a conscious decision. Now, I did end up with a very major conflict that I have to conflict myself out and recuse myself because the firefighters union endorsed me, and I ended up having to spend an entire day with the firefighters, and I was appointed one person who became my wrangler for the day. And he became my husband, actually, as it turns out. So, so I do have that conflict, and I recuse myself and have to make the decision on. I've actually recused myself from all labor negotiations, not just fire, and had to deal with sort of that ethical situation as well.
Yeah, hi. This is specifically for Judge Fernandez. I know you kind of touched on a little bit the special ethical considerations for running for judicial office. You know, no campaigning during the workday, no use of state whatever. But I was wondering if you could talk more about kind of how those special judicial ethical considerations came up during the rest of your campaign.
Well, okay. Well, in terms of the rest of the campaign, obviously one of the most difficult ones and the most obvious one is in terms of finance, right? That's something that I couldn't touch on. There are people that would come up to you and try to talk to you about that. I said, I'm sorry, you have to talk to my campaign finance manager, or I can refer you to this other law firm partner, talk to them, they've volunteered, etc. I'm not allowed to know of it. So I did ensure for myself that I didn't know who came with what. I did not go onto the own website. Remember, everything is public. I did not go onto the financial website, the reporting, so that I didn't know if I saw someone at an event, whether they were there because I invited them just to stop by, or they invited a bunch of law students to come. There was a huge mixture, so I never knew if somebody that was at an event for me, for example, or held for me, actually donated, what they donated, or otherwise. So I did keep that distance because for me, I have always been a very stringent, ethical person. True story, when I was really little, I stole pennies from my mother. I was overwhelmed with guilt. I had to confess in exchange for please don't spank me. So needless to say, I took that on with me during the campaign, and the people that got to know me knew that about me and knew better than to try to cross the line. There were attempts and other things. For example, even when you're running as a sitting judge, I cannot tell you how I may rule for something. I cannot discuss abortion. I cannot discuss so many other issues that all of my other colleagues here are free to jump in. I can't do that because the fact of the matter is, as a sitting judge, you want somebody to sit there to listen to your argument, whether it's on this side and on this side. And when I was meeting voters as well, especially for the general election, not for the primary, I said, listen, when you come into my courtroom, I am not going to ask you if you are Republican, if you are Democratic, if you are independent. I'm going to ask you to explain to me why I should rule your way. So I would kind of guide that there. So in terms of ethics, those are the two major difficulties that I encountered that's how I tackled those.
I have two questions, but I think I can roll them into one a little bit. So one, I'm not a shady person, but I don't like the idea of like an opponent, who knows what they can dig up. And so, how did that how just dealing with that. And I think that for me is a large deterrent from wanting to run, and also the fact that I really like lawyering. And so I was wondering if you could talk about the decision to do, like, for people who are lawmakers, if you could talk about the decision to go into like a legislative role or a lawyering role, and like aside from AG or district attorney, like what else is out there to in that capacity?
I'll hop in on the past and vulnerabilities. I mean, I think you have to be honest with yourself about what your vulnerabilities are. And I will tell you, I felt like I had a huge vulnerability. When I was 22 years old, my first husband went to prison for his meth addiction. That's what inspired me to go to law school. That's what inspired me to become a criminal defense attorney, and inspires me every day to fight to end mass incarceration. But at the same time, it's kind of weird, right? It's kind of weird to most people that I was married to somebody who went to prison and was with him for the 3.5 years he was in prison. Certainly in a more proper community like Mill Valley, where I don't think I knew anybody who had been to prison, because most people, if you have a drug addiction, you end up in rehab, not in prison, right? So for me, it was about facing that vulnerability. First, I had to tell my daughter. I had never told her. Which was a very emotional conversation. Second, I just had to put it out there, right? That was my story. That is part of who you are. So if you have a vulnerability, if you got a DUI, if you made some stupid, decision at some point in your life, putting that out there and owning it and showing them, like, listen, this is the stupid thing I did, and this is how much I learned from it. And this is why I'm so much better suited now to serve this community. The other thing is, nobody's perfect. Everybody's done something, right? So nobody wants to be judged as the worst decision they ever made. So you just have to remember that. Remember, people are human. Forgive yourself for whatever it is, and face up to it.
I want to add on to that. Donald Trump is president. Literally, no. I say that facetiously, but like not that facetiously. To be quite honest, he's shifted the Overton window of what's acceptable. So she's absolutely right. Own it. Be upfront about it. Be really honest with your team about it, and make sure people know any vulnerabilities before they come work for you. Whether you decide to present them or not publicly, it's important that the people who sign up their lives to work alongside you understand what they're getting into. But like, you've got some embarrassing photos on Facebook or a story like Jessica's. Nothing you've done is as bad as what Trump has done. You'll be fine.
Yeah. The other thing I would add to that is, sort of more personal, which is that you've got to develop, if you haven't already, really tough skin. Because sure, while the public, certainly is going to put things in context and look at the total picture and judge you, I think, appropriately. At the end of the day, the pain often comes from your feeling like the world has a negative view on you that is completely an unfair narrative. That kind of sense can overwhelm certain people. And if you've got that level of sensitivity, you need to acknowledge it and work on it, because oftentimes your opponents and their consultants will seize upon what they perceive to be your weakness. He or she is really sensitive. So when you talk about that thing unfairly, they get distracted, right? So toughen up. Kamala Harris, Senator Harris, gave me extraordinary advice. We've known each other for a bit. She said two things. Number one, every now and again, with your favorite person who you're not going to talk politics with, go get yourself a nice meal. Glass of wine, beer, Diet Coke, whatever it is. Just do that and enjoy it for about 2 hours. And then go home and go to sleep. And number two, never read the comments. Period.
I'd like to follow up on that because it just brings to light that even in a judicial campaign, there are things that happen sometimes with your own colleagues. I will not tell you whether it was state or federal or whether trial level appellate or Supreme Court. But I do want to share this because I think it's very important. When you're out there and you don't develop that very thick skin to just let things roll off, you're going to second guess yourself and you're going to be distracted from your goal. I'll tell you this because when I was out getting signatures, I approached a very respected individual. And again, I don't want to name the person because I don't want to embarrass the person. Nonetheless, I approached this person and said, "Hi, how are you? I'm getting signatures for our team." There were, I believe, 8 of us that were all on the same ballot, and we're collecting signatures for all of us to get on that ballot. I happen to have been endorsed by the party at the time. So this individual says, "Hi, how are you? Of course, how are you? Where do you, oh no, why did they put that woman on there, that Rosanna Fernandez? I'm not supporting her, not supporting that Hispanic." And I said, "Oh," I said, "well, I'm sorry, I'm sorry you feel that way. That's okay, don't worry, there's no need for you to sign the petition. I certainly hope you can support me." So then they turned to me and said, "Oh, of course, honey, don't worry about it. Thank you, you have a good evening." Never had a clue that, one, I introduced myself as Rosanna Fernandez. Didn't pay attention. Or that, two, I am Hispanic and you're talking directly to me. But needless to say, these things are going to happen. You approach them with a smile, you approach them with respect, and what happens is it's a learning experience. It's one for you because you do realize that it happens at every single level. And it's a learning experience for them because now every single time we see each other in a room, there's different conversation. How are you? So that's just an example. Take all of your weaknesses. There's always something that you can turn to your benefit. So think about that.
That's great advice.
Good morning. My name's Juan Thomas from Illinois, and I wanted to push back, or at least ask Senator Harris to respond to a comment you made. And I share your pain. I ran for Congress also after serving 2 terms on the school board, 2 terms as town clerk, and I ran against a multimillionaire, and the DCCC told me we're with him because he can self-fund and you can't. And so I thought ideas mattered too, but I guess they don't. You talked about running for office that are available. I'd like you to expand on that because when I heard you say that, it sounded like when offices are open, like there's no incumbent running. And I think I understand that practically and politically, but I also know that in this climate where, in my state, where we have a legislature and a governor that can't get a budget passed for the last 3 years, there's anxiety about people who stay in office and get nothing done. And so I know it's very hard to beat an incumbent, it's very challenging to run against the party, but what do you say to the concern of if we wait for offices that are available, you could be waiting 20, 30 years for a state senator or a congressman to retire who are not being effective and aren't doing their job.
All right, so you said a lot there, and I think you understand me pretty well because I think that's a pretty fair reflection of my views, is that people that run for office need to be more pragmatic than ideological, more pragmatic than passionate, in some sense. And everybody can disagree. I mean, I think there is room for disagreement. But the issue is that this is such a commitment, that it is such hard work that you need to have a path to victory when you decide to run. And the reality is, we can think whatever we want about America. The reality is you are not going to beat an incumbent member of Congress in the vast majority of cases. But there are 435 members of Congress. I'll stop here and let you respond. There are 435 members of Congress, and only, 2 or 3 lose in a year? And it takes a lot of, I don't know how to characterize this. A lot of ego is the only way I can think of it. A lot of ego to believe that of all the people running against incumbent members of Congress, and that you are the one that's going to beat that incumbent. It is harder said than it is harder done than that.
And I agree with you on a congressional and level. I guess my concern is on a local level. when you've got a city councilman or a state rep or a state senator, or county board member, do you also feel that way on that level as well, or do you sometimes feel like sometimes we ought to run to keep that person honest?
I personally don't think sometimes you ought to run.
I think you should run.
And let me.
So do I.
And here's why. And let me just finish because I know there's room for disagreement. The point is that in my community of the city of Memphis, there's just so much talent, and it goes to waste. And all that talent, when I say goes to waste, is a lot of those folks will never end up in office because they'll pick races that are driven by their passion instead of a cold hard calculation about where they can win. So one of the most talented individuals I have in my community is a young lady who, oh my God, if she ran for city council, right, she'd eat all our lunch in short order, right, if she ran for the right seat. But she says, oh man, there's a Republican out here in XYZ place. I'm gonna run against him in a heavily Republican district, and I'm gonna win him. I'm gonna beat him rather, as a beginner, right, no political experience, no base of support, no real fundraising, but I'm gonna beat him somehow. You're not gonna beat him. There's an open seat over here in a community that you have connections with. It's easy enough to move to that community, move over here, run in that open seat, and serve and give voice to the issues that you care about. Running a campaign is only a piece of the puzzle. It's serving an office and making change. Run for something you can win. So yeah, I think there's room for disagreement. Be pragmatic. Run for what's available, win, and change your community.
Okay, I'm here to disagree.
Hold on. Wait, excuse me, just 1 minute. We could go at this for a long time. I'd like us to take one more question, then turn to this exercise and let people converse with each other and perhaps with the panelists informally about this issue and others. So could we take our final question?
Hi, my name's John. My question's actually similar to one, so if you want to go ahead,
Yeah.
you can go ahead.
You answer.
I really do want to know about running to lose, because it seems like there are a lot of districts that are just viewed as being uncompetitive, and as a result, nobody even runs.
You are hitting on my sweet spot. A few things. One, I do think it's important. Winning is always the goal of any election. However, it's not the only good thing that happens during a campaign. You hold the elected official accountable if you're running against an incumbent. Not the only reason, but one of the primary reasons elected office holders focus on what they're doing and care about the public response to it is because of the impact it will have on the re-election. So by running against them, you get to force them to have that conversation about an issue that they might not otherwise. Two, you engage volunteers and you talk to voters, especially when you're running for something local. Most people aren't having that conversation or even thinking about their government in that way until you have that conversation with them at their door or over the phone. That matters. Three, by getting volunteers as a part of your campaign, if you are someone who cares about party building, that's literally building the party. People don't show up to join the Democratic Party. They show up because they care about a candidate, and then they stay for the people they've met. Your campaign can be the impetus for that. About the DCCC, which I have heard that story many, many, many times, the party often picks people who can raise money because that is both an indicator of larger success as well as something that they don't have to care about. Screw the party. If you want to run and there's a problem you think you can solve, you should do it. Know that it will be harder. Incumbencies win 9 out of 10 times. It is more challenging. However, it is worth doing anyway for all of those reasons I laid out. The other thing I will say is uncontested elections are a big problem in part because of what you just said. If voters don't have a reason to show up because their values aren't on the ballot in the first place, it becomes a cyclical problem. We're working with some candidates in Virginia, for example, that are running in districts where the Republican has been there and run uncontested for 3 cycles, which means Democrats in that area literally have no reason to show up and vote because why would they? That's a problem, and that's a failing of fundamental premise of democracy, in that voters have an option. So you should run. Moving to a new district can often seem a little carpetbaggy or a little bit too tactical for real people. It often can seem a little bit slimy. Do it if you want to. Know that that is often a perception that voters might have if they don't know your personal story and get to know you.
So just to put a little footnote there, there's a disagreement here, but there's some similarity too, which is know what your goal is in running for office. And if your goal is to put a voice on the ballot that where it hasn't been heard for a while, then maybe you do tackle the long, long, odd race. If you really want to make a career of it and you want to get going, think about the office you can plausibly win. Those are not, you don't have to go to war over those two ideologies. So very briefly, to remind you again, this is Alicia Plerhopoulos. I'm Heidi Lee Feldman. Part of why we were so excited to work with these panelists and to hear from all of them is because we're trying to develop a larger initiative. In some ways, Amanda helped me realize the need for it. We want to start an initiative specifically to encourage lawyers to run for state and local office. And our panelists really picked up on why. You guys have many skills that are transferable to what it takes to win. Plus, you have a lot of knowledge and savvy that will make it possible for you to learn how to work in those offices. So we think that there's room for targeted support. One of our first ways of trying to provide that to you is we've put out postcards, which we'd ask you to fill out. We're not collecting your information. You will not end up on an email list. We do have our web address on the back of that. It's just a splash page, and you can give us your information if you want to. But what we'd like you to do is take some time and look at the handout that was on your chair. And you don't have to use these prompts. Another thing you could do is write down one or two things that you're thinking differently about in light of something you heard at the panel today. But the goal of the exercise is for you to hear from yourself in a few months about how you felt at this moment when you were just getting all this information about running for office and being in office. If you would put the card in the envelope after you filled it out, I'll be standing with a box and we can collect the cards. We'll mail them out to you. So all you have to do is put your address on it. We will not crib your addresses and mail you lots of other things. We don't yet have the money to do that. So let's give a formal round of applause to the panelists.
Hi. And a big shout out to the ACS staff. Yes. Heidi, can I just say one thing, just lawyer or AG privilege? So I'm really fortunate to have been elected as the co-chair of the Democratic Attorney Generals Association. Here's the deal. We are out there now more than ever, much better organized than we were in the past and well led by an excellent executive director. We are so interested in the same things that folks talked about here, which is diversifying the pool of attorney generals in the state. They tend to not at all be diverse, and so we're out there recruiting candidates literally as we speak. If you're so interested or you know people who are interested, even if you're a DC resident, come take the job. If you can do it better, that's good. Please reach out to Sean Rankin at the Democratic Attorney Generals Association. Google DAGA, you can get information. Thanks.